Hey everybody, I'm Bret Kinsella, and this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We're here most every week, sometimes every other week, depending on schedules. But the goal here is to give you the story behind the story and what's going on in the generative AI world. And joining me today, I have a special guest. It's my friend Alan Firstenberg. Hey, Alan.
Hey, Brett, good to be here as always.
Well, glad to have you back. It seemed like a perfect time to get you sort of back in the loop on these types of things. We've been having some fun back channel conversations about a few things, but actually part of this reason why I wanted you to come on is like we didn't actually have time just to have a longer conversation, so we can do that now in the context of what's been a very eventful couple of weeks in the industry.
It has been, and yeah, a very eventful couple of weeks in the industry. I know you have me on when it's Google stuff, so it's been a month for Google.
I don't just have you on when there's Google stuff. There's other stuff that happened. I mean, I think you believe that Google was the only one who had significant announcements recently, but I assure you several other companies did.
Fair enough.
But yeah, you are always fun to have on when there's Google stuff going on because hey, you have that inside track, including early access to Google Gemini Pro 1.5, which we'll talk about. You already did a two voice devs on some of your experience, but I'll be interested to hear your feedback more. And I think we should get right into it just so people know, hey, there's a new lawsuit from Elon Musk against OpenAI. We are going to talk about Google Gemma. We're going to talk about 1.5 with that million token context window. We're also going to talk about maybe some missteps that Google has made recently, which seems to be a recurring pattern at this point. We're going to talk about Groq, Mistral. We've got a lot of things in here. Klarna, they said the quiet part out loud, which was kind of interesting, which I want to get your take on as well. So we have a really packed schedule today. Hey, everybody, if you're out there, just let us know in the chat. Just say, hey, you're here, where you're coming in from, or something like that. We'd like to know who's out there. Plus, make comments, ask questions, anything that you see going on in the industry or what we're saying. We're happy to engage around that. It's one of the reasons we do this live. Okay, so we might as well get to our first story. And this is brand new. This has happened within the last hour. Elon Musk sues OpenAI and CEO Sam Altman over a contract breach. So I'm sure most people haven't. Jurgen Gravestein. Hey, Jurgen, another day, another OpenAI lawsuit. Yes, so true. So true. That's the type of commentary that we expect from the viewers of the Generative AI News Rundown. Okay, so he's suing OpenAI because they violated the mission to develop artificial intelligence for the broad benefit of humanity. So, like, is context here? I think a lot of people know this, but in case you don't, it was actually the first check for OpenAI when it was a nonprofit came from Elon Musk. He has said various times that it was $100 million. I think most people think it was actually 30 million, but it doesn't. Like, he gave the first big check, and $30 million just, helped him get off the ground. Plus, critically, his involvement and his money got Ilya Sutskever to come in, and Ilya's been one of the key technical leads, who also involved in a little shakeup last fall. But in any event, so he was really big on this becoming a nonprofit because, as you know, he has great fear of robot overlords and super intelligence taking over. And when they decided to become a private company, he dropped off the board and said he wasn't there. But he's suing Microsoft's OpenAI, and basically it's pretty straightforward. He says, like, they said they're going to do this, now they're not doing it the way that they said they were going to, and that's a breach of contract. That's about all we have right now. But any thoughts on this, Alan? Alan,
I'm not sure what there is to say. I mean, I had a brief technical glitch there. I'm not sure what there is to say. He's got a point. There have been a lot of critics besides him that have been criticizing OpenAI from now having this dual corporate structure and exactly what that means. So they have now the open nonprofit part that is supposed to be doing something, and this commercial venture, which is actually what is getting them, money and attention and all of that. So I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of shakeup from this coming out.
Well, my view is this is going nowhere, but I think it's a good headline. And the other thing too is if if Musk had done this 2 years ago or even a year ago, it may have been viewed differently than him doing it now because he actually has a competing service with Grok and with X.AI, which also is trying to serve the same market as OpenAI. And interestingly enough, is not a nonprofit.
Yeah. Oh, shockingly, there. I think even if he had done it in the middle of OpenAI's leadership chaos, it might have meant something different. It might have said, hey, I signed on to this and now we've got this leadership chaos and, we expected this company to be doing something and they're not now. Somebody needs to come in and straighten all this out. But this clearly is a late play for no obvious reason right now.
Well, and I think like VoiceBot and Synthedia are sort of known for the reasoned response to these things, but I'm going to put a hot take out there because why not? There's significant upside for Elon Musk in doing this. It has nothing to do with the lawsuit, but the coverage of the lawsuit is going to say he's got this conflict of interest with XAI and Grok, and he's going to get all this free media exposure and saying, oh, it looks like Elon Musk has an alternative to OpenAI, which, unless you're in the industry, probably haven't really paid much attention to.
Yeah, I would agree. This seems like Elon trying to, get attention again. It must be a slow week in, whatever his companies are doing.
The man is a brilliant marketer. Maybe he's doing this just because like he feels strongly about this from an ethical standpoint, but I also believe that he would be the type of person who would be pretty excited that if he got two things for one, which was a lot of coverage, plus maybe creating an issue for one of his rivals. Okay, so let's get into another topic here. And this is about Google. So Google's had like kind of a big 10 days before the snafu. We're going to talk about the snafu or fiasco, probably be my better term about this. But from a technology standpoint, it seemed like they're finally getting it together. So a couple things came out, and we can jump into this. I think the biggest surprise I had was the Gemma models, which we can talk about in a minute because they're open source. And I wasn't expecting that partnership with Hugging Face. I think it's actually a smart move on their part. Whether or not they execute on it properly is a different story. But the real head turner was Gemini 1.5 and its 1 million token context window, 5x the next largest one in the market, publicly available, which is Anthropic. What do you think?
Well, two things I think. One is that this was two sets of announcements that came hot on the heels of yet another Gemini announcement earlier in the month. I think February was really Google saying, hey, we're still in the race, and here's how we're still in the race, and here's how we're still in the race. And, going through that list of look at all of this stuff that we're doing now under the Gemini brand name.
Yes.
So I think that was the big play on Google in February. Specifically, I've gotten access to Gemini 1.5 Pro. More and more people are getting access to it, so it's not that rare a thing anymore. It's clear that this product is still very raw, still very early. It's not meant for prime time yet, but there's a lot of potential there. And even in just the simple tests that I and then I'm seeing others are doing, you're just doing stuff that you didn't even really think was possible. I mean, there are people that are throwing their entire code base for some project they're working on and asking it questions and getting good answers. I threw at it the entire video of Two Voice Devs and said, pick a good thumbnail. And it picked a good thumbnail. I threw at it the entire text of Les Miserables and put in a couple of, needles, and it found the needles pretty well. So it's not just doing a good job. It's doing a good job with a long context, which we've seen problems with before. And it seems to be doing it pretty consistently. This is, I won't say it's perfect because it's not, but I think this is really Google fired a big shot. And I think this is a big one that they're mostly succeeding at.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I will be interested to see sort of head-to-head comparisons between it and Anthropic, because Anthropic has really struggled with the middle token segments. And so you think about like break them into thirds or quintiles. Usually people think about thirds, the first third, second third, and the third of the token context window. And Anthropic's been pretty open about the fact that it's largely it's quite good in the first third. It's still good in the third, but in the middle, it's had a lot of trouble, over a lot more errors, a lot more hallucinations, and so that'll be interesting. Now, when you did your Les Mis test, and you inserted the facts, maybe you can give people this idea or tell them what you did when you inserted these extraneous facts into the upload. Did you separate them by sort of first third, middle third, back third, or some other way?
I didn't, or I did so kind of randomly, and I didn't go back and check exactly where I had put the ones that it was found and which ones it didn't. And I also want to give credit to Roger Kibbe, by the way, who suggested the format for this specific test. He suggested with a different book, which I tried using, which Google rejected for safety reasons. So that was interesting on its own.
Is that a commentary on the books that you or Roger select?
I don't know. Well, both of us selected something that was open source and fairly long. So we pulled something from Project Gutenberg. So we had a good chance that it was already trained on it. And part of what we were trying to test on was, is it just going to fall back on its training? Or is it actually going to find what we claimed the text to be? And in this case, it found it, even though it knew what Les Miserables already was. It was able to go through my version of Les Miserables and find those details. I think what was really interesting for me is that in finding the details, it then somehow wove it into the rest of the story. So, for example, I asked it, one of the things was the lottery numbers, the winning lottery numbers, which it found, and then said, keep in mind that, these are not real lottery numbers. This was just used as an example in the story to suggest the notion of Lady Luck and so forth in the rest of this context. And I'm like, well, that's impressive. That it hallucinated on, clearly.
Yes.
But it somehow wove this in thinking it was actually part of the story, which
that
was
is
clever.
interesting. And I did not know that part of the story. That's a really interesting one. What are your thoughts on large context window use cases? And so there's this question about this idea of like, should I put this into a vector database if I've got a lot of data or some other type of data store? It doesn't have to be a vector database. Or should I just do this in memory? And there's some trade-offs with both. There's some latency trade-offs with using these big context windows and things like that. But you're also avoiding the chance or the need to like vectorize all your data and then the other costs associated with updating and maintaining that.
I think it's going to depend on use case, obviously. I mean, that's a nice cop-out answer, I realize. But what I think I think the best way I can think about it is these large context windows are nice, but they are slow. And Google has talked about doing work to reduce that latency, that processing. But I can't imagine, I mean, right now, to process Les Miserables, which it clocked in at just under 900,000 tokens, took about 90 seconds.
Okay.
So even if you get an order of magnitude improvement, that's still 9 seconds. That still feels kind of slow. And I'm having a tough time seeing how they're going to get an order of magnitude improvement on that.
What was once you uploaded it? What was the latency for the queries?
The queries were 90 seconds.
Every query was.
Every query, because every time it has to go through the entire context window again. That's the problem with context windows in general. Now, maybe you can start, I could make guesses at ways to shortcut that and speed it up, but even so, at some point, it's going to take time.
Well,
there's just no way
probably
around
been a
that.
time in the past when you've been compiling code and like you just let it run overnight.
Sure, and maybe that's going to be the approach to this. That we'll use these large context windows for big batch queries. When I say here is the entire set of 20 years of the annual report of this company, go mine it for the following sets of information, and you'll turn it loose overnight, and it'll churn through that overnight, or churn through that for 2 minutes. That might be a reasonable approach. I think the other big thing, and there have been a lot of people talking about this, is that these large context windows are good for things like movies, where, yeah, it's still taking some time, but it seems to be taking less time than the movie itself did to actually run. So that's still a time improvement. And it's doing something that it couldn't otherwise do. So, right now, when I fed it a 45-minute or so video, it only took, I think it was about 30, 45 seconds to process and find those frames. And that's a reasonable, trade-off. I'm willing to spend 30 minutes to save myself 45 minutes.
What was the cost?
I think for that one did come to, I want to say it was a few hundred tokens, but not too many more.
Yeah, so like de minimis in terms of actual spend.
Yeah, I think they're saying it's I forget the number off the top of my head. I feel like it was about 500 or so tokens per frame, and each frame was a second.
Got it.
But
so
that's going by memory, so I could be completely off there.
But when it for the search space to find the frame for a thumbnail, it's looking at every frame, right?
It's looking at every frame.
So it's 500 by 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but again, still low thousands, not too expensive. What about when you were processing Les Mis?
Les Mis took 90 seconds for it to process each time, for it to process the whole thing plus my question.
And I guess 1 million tokens is what, 10 cents, 1 cent or something like that? I don't know what.
So at the current going rate for Gemini 1.0 Pro, which admittedly we don't know that's going to be what the actual cost is, it costs about 50 cents a query for the full 1 million tokens, which is not bad. It's just not good at doing that in bulk. You can't see it doing that for hundreds of thousands of users, but you could see it doing it once in a while as a one-off.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's super interesting. Now, and if people have questions about Gemini 1.5, sort of weigh in here. But I think the other thing is the idea of uploading your video, the native multimodal capabilities. This is like a very clear manifestation of it.
Yes. And I think, this is only really the first time that we're kind of beginning to see exactly what a native Gemini multimodal system can do. Is, how is it thinking about this? How is it doing those sorts of comparisons? What are the associations that it's creating between the frames and multiple video inputs? There was at least one person that did submitted a hand-drawn picture and said, find this scene in this movie, and it found it. So those sorts of things are interesting to see where it goes.
Well, the demo that they provided, where it actually did this line drawing of what could be construed as an astronaut's boot stepping on the ground, was very impressive because it's not even you're not describing a scene, like it's just a concept. And then it actually found in the transcript of the Apollo mission what it thought was which happened to turn out to be correct, was the scene or the time in the transcript when that happened. Now, I think some people have suggested that we've seen chicanery before with Google about this, but I actually believe this time they were super careful about that.
Well, I think they were, but I also think in this case, this was one of the interesting elements of kind of tossing it out to the world for a small definition of the world up front. So yes, they did a couple of demos, but then there were also a bunch of people like me and a bunch of others who said, well, here's my demo, and I'm not faking it. This is live. So I feel like, you saw a lot of videos like that come out immediately. And that's kind of bolstered the improving the believability about what Google said.
It's a credibility thing. And
we'll speak to the credibility in a minute, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, we might as well just, Well, actually, before we get into that, what are your thoughts on Gemma?
So I've played with Gemma only a little bit, and I played with it in one of the in Google's hosted environment. And I feel like my question about it so far is, why does this exist? Um, it obviously exists partly because they want to be able to say, hey, look, we've got open models as well, and we're going to let people play with them still. But I mean, I've seen videos of people trying to use it, and it's doing a bad job. Um, my experiments with it have been decidedly mediocre. I want to, I feel like I want to talk to people who are used to using these smaller models and seeing what their results have been and comparing them head to head with, I want to compare it to Llama 2 and to Mistral's smaller models and see how they are and what they're used for. Because certainly so far, when I try to do, fact retrieval, it's bad, which is fine. I'm of the camp that LLM shouldn't be used for fact retrieval. I'm good with that. But then I want to know what it is good for, and that's where I'm still wrestling with understanding why this model is there.
Yeah, I can see that it's potentially a clever strategy from Google's standpoint, but it might be too clever in some ways if they don't execute on it properly. So Microsoft's really been pushing Phi, and then we have, and that's a proprietary model, but like they're talking about it a lot, and so Google's, I'm sure, paying attention to that for a small language model. And then you have the big news around Mistral, and so the momentum there, and obviously Llama. So I think like they're trying to straddle the market, which in some ways is great. If you win, you've got the whole big market, right? Which is amazing, but it makes it harder to win. And like it's kind of a play that you do when you're already strong in one segment, and I don't think they have strength in any segment at the moment.
Well, I think also part of what they're just trying to say is, hey, remember that we're players. Because also, some announcements that slipped under the radar from Google during February. One was that they released a model that was very, very small, very fine tuned to the specific task of file type identification. And when I saw this announcement, I'm like, who in the world cares about file type identification? We've got programs that do this. We've got programs that have been doing this for decades. Why do we need a model to do this? And then when you read, their article and their paper about it, well, okay, it turns out that Google does file type identification an awful lot, not surprising for Google. And the existing methods only succeeded about 50% of the time.
Okay.
And with this model, they were able to boost that to something like 70 to 80% of the time. And it was just as fast, just as performant as the previous system. So here they are saying, look, we can do AI and we can do it for specific things really well, really efficiently. And that's what AI can be used for. So they're out there trying to say, hey, we're players. And I think Gemma was just one other step in that. Hey, we're still a player.
Yeah. My thinking is they will tire of supporting that, and will really just focus on the frontier models because Google wants to play in the premium space. So that would be my expectation, that they will starve those of attention, but we'll see. I mean, it does play, it potentially plays, and maybe it's just a matter of, hey, we might as well just show people what we're working on. We'll just throw that out there. I just have a feeling that it's not going to get enough attention, and it's going to actually sully the brand more than enhance the brand.
I think it's also, and this might be related to the first story that we had about Elon Musk, I think it's also them saying, hey, once upon a time, we released everything we did for free. We opened everything
Yes.
up. OpenAI has forced us to close some of it, but
that is a stretch. Okay.
But we're better than them, and we're going to release some of our stuff open again. We're releasing some of our research again. So
another just Google thing before we skip into sort of the negative stuff. They also did an announcement, Stack Overflow, which got almost no attention, but I think is potentially significant. It's significant from two angles. First of all, Stack Overflow a year ago at this time was basically saying these are like large language models, generative AI. That's bad. Well, they were really just saying like, we'll never support this, and like shutting down access and everything because they're like, we're so important, we're a community. And then of course in April they said, oh, wait a second, I think we're going to do something on this. And then later in the year they a little bit, but I think this is probably better for Stack Overflow because they're heading towards irrelevance fairly quickly. Um,
Well,
and good for good for Google because they've got a lot of catch up to do for Cody behind GitHub Copilot, which has a lot of market momentum.
right. I think two elements here on two different fronts. The first is um, one of the things that everyone keeps identifying is we need more and new and accurate content. So if
Yes.
all we're going to do is relying on what was previously code generated, we're going to start getting model rot pretty quickly. So I think Google's saying, okay, here's one place we're going to get what is hopefully good content from, Stack
Yes.
Overflow. So I think that was encouraging. The second is that the other piece of news, which I think was like the day before, was their announcement with Reddit that they've got a
Yes.
deal to access Reddit data as well. So this is clearly Google saying, we're being good players here. They're trying to say this. We're going to be good players here. We're going to license data from various locations and do it ethically and make sure we're getting good, new, fresh content coming in. Unlike those guys over at OpenAI who were going and stealing New York Times content.
But also doing contracts with the AP and stuff like that.
Right.
But like, so we had like the race to more parameters for models, more parameters, better thing. And then the race to lots of training data tokens, right? So bigger. And now we're focused on quality. And actually OpenAI has been the first at each of these stages, basically, because they've been focused on quality a lot. And I think this is a really good point with Stack Overflow in particular, because that is basically a community moderated quality control system. And so there's not incorrect things in there or things that are substandard, but like compared to internet data, much higher level of quality. There's a filter there. Now you bring up Reddit. Doesn't that run in the opposite direction?
Well, I would argue no, because again, it goes back to what content are they looking for? They're not necessarily looking for facts. This is Google, after all. They already have that. What they're looking for is how people talk, how people type, what the conversation patterns look like. That is absolutely critical to making LLMs that understand us. So we can feed in Shakespeare to it all day. We can feed in the highly crafted prose of news stories all that we want. But if you want to know how people are talking, you go to Reddit. That's how people are communicating these days. So that's why that training data, I think, is so critical.
Exactly. So that's the thing. We think about facts and the information, but a big part, in fact, the majority of the value that the large language models have, this is a great point, is being able to understand what's being said, if it's said particularly in a certain type of nomenclature, slang, whatever you want to think about it, style, and then be able to output in ways that will have more resonance with people. So I think it's
right.
That's an important
I feel like this is what people keep forgetting about these large language models is they're not designed to be fact generation machines. They're designed to be conversation generation machines or answer, I don't care if it's correct or not, generation machines. They're designed to understand language. Google is able to tap into its vast repository of how to search for facts. Else how? OpenAI is doing so as well. It's got, it's building that knowledge base to do that.
Yeah, I think the key thing to keep in mind though is because it has dual use, is that like you have to be thinking about segmenting potentially the data sets for this is for style and this is for facts. Because if you're going to a place like Quora is a perfect example, like it's rife with inaccurate information. It's like terrible. Like there's a certain amount of community review in that as well and standardization. Okay, but it's basically just people trying to pump up their resume at this point. It was good at one point. So anyway, let's move on to like another topic with Google because Because what the heck? It's like the Google show. But hey everybody, this is Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. We talk about the biggest news, and there's been a lot of big news from Google over the last 2 weeks. We wanted to give that proper attention. We've got several other stories, Mistral, Groq, etc., as we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. But I just want to bring this up too because we had this other big issue where Gemini started creating racially diverse Nazis, and really, as I walk through this whole idea, when we think about what happened there, it was like, okay, it wouldn't do white people, or you had to be really clever in order to get it to do a white person. Okay, fine. Like, I think some people could be like, okay, I understand at least what they're trying to do. There's some people obviously be like, that's wrong. Fine. Okay. So maybe they weather that storm. Maybe they weather the storm of uh, racially and gender diverse popes, Catholic popes, because maybe there's some idea that in the future this could change. I don't think that the Catholic Church has like an intent for that, but okay, fine. But then when it's like the Vikings are mostly look like American Indians or South Asian women, okay, that's a little hard. We're talking about sort of the historical inaccuracies around the U.S.'s founding, fine. And then all of a sudden, it's like this third rail of we just created the first black Nazis, put them in 1940s garb of the Third Reich. And it's just like there's no going back from that. So they pulled it, which is fine, and they're trying to fix it and those types of things. But this is a big problem. They had other issues earlier in the year, sort of the most notable ones when Bard launched and it had a factual inaccuracy, and that was the only thing anyone had to go on because they couldn't try Bard. They didn't make it open for people to use, so they're just like, well, let's just look at what you provided us. Oh, there's factually incorrect information. When Gemini came out, they had the issue where it looked like they were showing off capability that didn't actually exist. And so there's this idea of like maybe a pattern that comes up that people are like, wait, can I trust Google on this? The biggest issue right now is that this is a product issue. So they made a product problem where the others were marketing problems that could have been easily, sort of maybe tucked away.
No, absolutely. I think this was two things. One, it was a massive mess up on nearly the same order as issues they had with gender issues in the early days of Google Photos, for those that might remember that. I think there's a couple of things, though, to keep in mind. And your article talks a little bit about this, about how did they get into this mess in the first place? And they got into this mess because these systems have bias in them. There's built-in bias. So they tried to apply some correction to that bias. And they messed that up. But here's the thing. They're trying to correct the bias. If I, for example, and this was an example that I had tested before, if I had tried to ask these various models to show me a realistic photo of the World Tic-Tac-Toe Championship final game, most of the other models will show two white guys staring at each other over a board. Google didn't. Now, that's a place where trying to correct for that training bias is appropriate. They tried to correct for that training bias in places where it wasn't appropriate as well. And that's the problem, is that, like any good engineer, they saw a problem and they said, oh, we'll apply an engineering solution to this, and didn't think about the full consequences of that engineering solution. And I think this is, one could say this goes back to when they fired, several important and diverse members of their AI ethics team 3 years ago now, I think it is. That they're at the stage a little ahead of everybody else, where they're saying we've identified a bias and we're going to do something about it, but then they're messing it up. Nobody else seems to be saying we've identified a bias and we're going to do something about it.
By unbiasing, they created a new kind of bias.
Yes, they did.
And it's basically always going to happen. unskewing information creates a new kind of skew.
That's an inherent problem with these systems, though.
But it's like they thought of it as an objective activity when it's there's values associated with it.
Well, but that's the problem, is that the training material itself has values associated with it.
Sure, absolutely. It's just like there's a hubris here that goes on at like a lot of big tech companies. Google's not alone in this. Is that they think that like we're so smart. We've done all of these amazing things. We can just fix this other problem too. And there's this big blind spot of unintended consequences.
Like I said, this is an engineering problem. That's how all engineers react.
No, this is not an engineering problem. This is more than that, because there was an explicit intent. Because I've seen some of the system prompts, which I assume are correct, but maybe those are false too. I've seen some of the system prompts they created too, which were very specifically aligned with basically sort of pushing this idea out, not to change the data set, but to tell people that there's a change in the data set. So we're going to give you something different. It's not something you asked for, which is like, there's a hubris there of saying, we're paternalistic. We can tell you what you can have. It's to me, it's just like, why is Google the arbiter of these things?
Well, but part of it is that the training set doesn't necessarily contain either the data or the weights to the data that need to reflect let me put it this way. The training data we know is biased. We've had plenty and plenty of tests that demonstrate that training data is biased. The question is, how do you correct for that bias? And I see the same problem with a variety of other things, not just racial and gender bias.
Yeah. No, I think it's fine. There's a lot of other things, because Nate Silver had this stuff, and like he's basically saying he asked about socialism versus Nazism, and they're like, well, Nazism's obviously worse. He has the same question, Nazism and capitalism, and he's just like, well, we can't tell the difference. They're both terrible, right? And it's like, okay, like I mean there's the only way you get that is to put your thumb on the scale and not exposing the information of the world, but actually creating information of the world.
Well, but again, the information of the world has bias to it.
There's no doubt, but there's also facts. And
as Mike says, there's lies, there's damned lies, and well, he says machine learning, but yeah, that is statistics.
Yeah, we'll put that up. Yeah, there is bias. Lies, damn lies, and machine learning. I love that. That's Michael Novak. You get the gold star for the best comment of the day. Jurgen says, how do they not spot this themselves? They're not incredibly rushed. I think, yes, it is incredibly rushed, but I actually believe the output is intentional. They just didn't think that someone would do this with Nazis because apparently they don't know what happened with Microsoft Tay.
And I think your point, and you made this in the article as well, is again, there's this Silicon Valley echo chamber. And they tried it with a bunch of stuff that made sense to them, and they didn't try it with this. And this is where I think their firing of their ethical AI team 3 years ago is coming back to haunt them.
I'm not sure it would have been any better, but like maybe like we can disagree with that.
Well, I
think they fired some people, but I don't think they changed the infrastructure. I think it's still there. Like we have high profile people that were dismissed, but that doesn't mean they stopped that they dismantled the office.
No, but I think that office was dramatically reduced in influence. I think. And maybe I could be wrong.
I thought they were until I saw this, because this is exactly what I would have thought that would have come out from the other group, because it's about saying this is the way you should think about the world as opposed to this is the way the world is.
Right. I would have expected, his question of, did nobody think to try to test generating Nazis? I think the ethical AI team would have tested that. They would have come up with sets like that, and they would have uncovered issues like this.
Yes, that's it. Well, in any event, I actually think that this will largely blow over because no one's actually using the Google models in any large scale right now. So it was a big news cycle. It was definitely a bad issue. I actually talked to an executive today at a fairly large company who had been thinking about the Gemini and Duet solutions for basically a Copilot type implementation within his organization, or it's now called I'll call Gemini. But he's like, I'm not sure I'll do that now because I don't know where this is going to go. So I think that like there's a little bit and around the edges that matters because they're fighting from behind. So overall, I think Google's probably will get past this. They'll fix it. People will be okay. But I think the problem will be the next shoe that drops is going to be a huge issue for them because it's going to reinforce this perception, even if mostly it's unfair.
I totally agree. You know, what I hope actually comes out of this, aside from beating up a few Google executives who deserve to be beaten up, is
you can't do that. Like it will not condone violence. You can't get that out of Gemini.
Okay, fair. Is that I hope that anybody who's evaluating these systems would look at any system they use, not just any Google system, but look at any system that they use and ask, what are the biases in this system and how do we deal with it?
I think Sundar is not the person to lead the company. That's my takeaway of this. I think this is something that he let go way too long. So I expect there to be a transition in the next year, and whoever comes in will exert different type of authority.
I agree. I think Sundar is good to lead Alphabet. I think it's demonstrating he is not good to lead Google at this point.
Yeah. I think it's too much of a hornet's nest. Okay, let's talk about something fun. Mistral. 2 new high performance LLMs, largely good. We could actually try. Well, we can't try these online. I've got. I don't know if we'll go through the whole Groq demo because I had some stuff set up. But we've been talking about Google a long time. In any event, they come out pretty hot and heavy, and basically saying, based on their benchmarks and stuff like that, hey, you've been looking for an alternative to GPT-4. It's not these other things out there. It's us. We're better than 3.5, and we're as good as 4.
Now, I'm going to say I've always distrusted all of these, these metrics, these benchmarks that come out. I've always distrusted them. What I do trust are people's experiences, and I've heard people talking about it, and they're saying, yeah, Mistral is definitely in there. It's definitely one to look at for your needs. You should be going and evaluating it. I think the crucial point that you've pointed out, though, is again, this isn't an open model. This is an API, which is good, but it's not an open model. So, what is that saying about Mistral?
So part of the reason about that, so Mistral's like they really went hot and heavy on the open model thing and we're support the open source community. So this was a surprise, kind of like Gemma was a surprise in the other direction. This was a surprise for me. This was not what I expected. It doesn't surprise me that they have a closed model. I just didn't expect that this set of models would be closed, but that's fine. It's a strategy for them. I think it's very good. They've got good heritage. The people who are the founders, who are leading people or leading scientists in the space. So I think it's pretty interesting to them. The other thing about this that I think is easily overlooked is the Microsoft partnership. Microsoft has the most market share of companies that are using generative AI models right now through Azure, mostly because they're using OpenAI, which is only available there. But this is a good place to switch people over because they're already in that ecosystem. And there's been a little bit of controversy in Europe about this, saying, hey, we watered down the EU AI Act in order to make sure that the European generative AI companies would be competitive. And then look, you just like go and you sign up with bad big company Microsoft from the United States. And I'm like, well, wait a second. This is exactly what you wanted. Microsoft has huge distribution. You want Mistral to be successful. You want a European company to be. You want it to have a deal with Microsoft. You want it to have a deal with Google. You want it to have a deal with AWS. In addition to direct into the native and the data sovereign, the sovereign data centers that the people are setting up. But I think this is a win, and I'm not sure this would have changed anything. But the fact that the EU actually started to look slightly more business friendly in the last quarter of last year and this towards generative AI reduces the perceived risk from people outside of Europe adopting a European-based company as their large language model provider.
I agree. I think the other thing that I think this speaks to me is saying that, yeah, there are other companies on the world stage that we, the collective we, need to be looking at. We don't need to just be looking to Silicon Valley to find the answers. We've got other places out there that can do this sort of stuff, and Mistral being one of those certainly says, look, Europe is in the game, and they've got some unique insights into how to do this that I think will play to some people's advantages.
Yeah. So I think keep an eye on them. There's a lot of interest. I've heard from executives who want to try it, and they were already interested in the Mistral model for some of their smaller language model needs. So I think this is good for them from the perspective of enterprise buyers. It's a good move. I'm not going to bring up the Groq thing because we talked so much about the other topics so far, but I did want to get your impression of Groq while we're here and what you think it leads to.
Now, I assume by Groq, we mean Groq with a Q, right?
Yes, this one.
To be clear, yes. This was interesting. I only played with it. I saw it demonstrated a little bit last week. And if you haven't played with it, it's mind-blowing. It really is shocking to see a model respond that quickly. And I think what it kind of demonstrates is that we're going to start seeing these software hardware partnerships coming out that address this. Now, this is using their custom. Now, either they're doing something completely magical and fraudulent, or they've really unlocked a great new way to deal with existing models on custom hardware. And they say, we're building hardware around what these large language models need. And that's actually kind of similar to what Google's been saying for a while with its tensor chips. We're building this hardware and custom dedicated architectures around what we need in the AI space. And I think we're going to see more of that. And you saw Sam Altman try to make his pitch for $7 gazillion to do it himself. So that because he wants to play in the hardware space as well, because that's where you're going to see some great things happening. So I think that's interesting. I think it's also interesting. Grok currently has a lawsuit against Elon Musk for they have a trademark violation trademark violation. I think they've either filed the suit or threatened the suit.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but I'll look into it. That's really good. I mean, one thing while Elon was talking, I was actually typing in Groq with a K versus Groq with a Q and trying to and really not to see what it said, but mostly just to show people how fast it is. And 267 tokens per second. Is that what that is? I don't know what it is, but it basically shows up instantly. And if people think about if they've used GPT-4 through like ChatGPT Plus, or they've used the GPT 3.5 and like how much faster it is, Grok is that much faster than GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is very fast. It's just like almost instantly gives you 3 paragraphs as your answer. I will say that if you play with it, you can use the Llama 270B or the Mistral 8x7B. Both are super fast. But they don't have like recent internet information. So if you're going to try to use it for like search of anything recent, it's not going to show up there. But it's perfectly capable of other types of things you might want it to do.
I think the other thing though to take a look at when you're looking at this is take a look at their pricing. I tried doing some back of napkin calculations when I saw this. Their pricing is a good. I mean, unless I did my math wrong, which is totally possible, their pricing was like 10 times more expensive than anybody else out there. Anybody else that's running a Llama 2 model for you to access. And that may be worth it, but that still seems like an awful lot.
Yes. Okay. Well, that was fun talking about Grok. Thanks for doing that. All right, let's talk about, we're going to do sort of lightning round on the stuff left. NVIDIA. Oh, jeez. Let's see. Can we even show this chart? Like the hockey stick on the NVIDIA chart's getting so big, like it's hard even to fit on a screen. They did almost as much last quarter as they did all of last year. Like about 85% of the total revenue of last year was done in this quarter, and or a huge proportion of that is from their data center revenue, and some of that's going to be the Meta purchase of 350,000 H100s, I'm sure, but they are the giant of generative AI. I think I wrote that they're becoming the giant of generative AI almost a year ago this month, or actually it was a year ago this month, but it was 10 months before or 11 months before I wrote this one. They're absolutely the giant.
Yeah, I saw an animated video comparing their market capitalization to, I think it was Intel's market capitalization. And you see Intel big and constantly rising, and then suddenly NVIDIA just spikes and dwarfs Intel. It was absurd. But I think this also speaks again to Grok talking about their custom hardware and Google talking about Tensor and Altman wanting to build his chips.
Yeah.
That everyone wants a piece of this pie.
Yeah, your margin is my opportunity. I think everybody's looking at that. Now, there's another chart floating around that shows how Cisco up through until the dot-com bubble went it basically had a very similar curve and then just like cratered and just never recovered. And so there's a possibility that something could happen, either a bubble in this space or a new technology comes out. But for now, they're just minting money and third most valuable company in the world at this point.
I think minting is actually an interesting term here, since we previously saw an NVIDIA spike and then a crash around the crypto craze. So we saw
not as much, but yes, crypto and gaming during 2020 and 2021. Yes, that's true. But like nothing.
Nothing.
We
like
go
this.
back to that picture. It's like nothing. You can see it, right? It's not as big. I'll pull it up there. This is sort of the crypto bubble here with the purple, and then the little gaming bubble as well down there. But in any event, or I mean that's the gaming, and then there's the crypto one. So, but yes, this is like kind of a once in a lifetime thing, but it's not really once in a lifetime because we saw this with actually infrastructure build out. We saw this with Cisco routers. In the past. A couple other things I'll just get your feedback on. Abridge raised 150 million for essentially ambient listening between doctors and patients, can put that in the EMR. They just actually raised $30 million 3 months ago. Actually, it was two tranches. I think it was 215s. And then another 150. The key thing here is what changed? They're now going to build foundation models related to healthcare.
That's an interesting approach. We've seen a couple of companies that are entering this broad space, talking about how do we do better transcription services, and how do we do better question and answers for your transcriptions, and how do we provide a summary of a transcription in something that is actually understandable to the patient. We've seen a lot of that stuff before, but here's a company that is saying, we're going to follow the model that we're going to build the model and sell that model to anybody who wants to do something with it. And I think we're going to see people realizing that's where you make your money, is selling the bricks, not selling the end service.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Levi's strategy during the California gold rush, right?
Yeah.
A couple other things I'm just going to hit. I'm going to skip a bunch of these stories, but I want to hit a couple of them. Pindrop came out with a new solution called Pindrop Pulse. This is for automatic detection of deepfakes. I thought this was super interesting because everybody says, here's what my success rate is. Like I can do this. They actually separated the success rate between models that are known. So like models that are out there that they basically test all the models that exist in the market that are commercially available for voice clones. Models that are unknown, so what they would consider to be a 0-day attack, which would be used for prod as a voice clone. And then they also reported a less than 1% false positive rate, which is something that most companies don't talk about, because the false positive rate is a huge problem. You can have 100% protection against voice clones if you flag everything as fraudulent, right? So you can get to 100%, but if your false positive rate is 50% or even 10%, it's super expensive. It slows processes. Customers get mad. All these types of things. So I thought that was super interesting. Adobe came out with a new solution so you can talk to your documents. So I had a question for you on this. It's like, okay, this makes sense. I'm in Adobe as opposed to like uploading that file to ChatGPT or Claude to like find out what's in it or ask to query it. It makes sense that this just become an embedded feature. However, I'm not even going to be able to do two Adobe files at the same time. I can only do one at a time, right? Whereas in ChatGPT, I can upload both files or Claude, and I can do those. And then my question is like, if you have this capability it's good to have it in context, but if you have this capability because you need it for all your other things that aren't Adobe files, like, does anybody care? What do you think?
No. I mean, I think what we're going to eventually see, I mean, Adobe had to offer this. They had to say, look, this is what you can do with PDFs. But I mean, you already see off-the-shelf offerings from Google, from a pile of other companies that are doing it with PDFs and all your other stuff. And, if Adobe has not been in this before, companies that have let you search your documents before are going to be where people will turn to.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that Michael asked if they build their own LLM. I actually think they're using one of the NVIDIA models, but that's something I'm trying to confirm. Last thing I wanted to just mention to you is like Klarna made a big splash this week because they basically said, we've captured $40 million in savings and replaced 700 full-time call center agents by implementing OpenAI on the back end, and basically shifting a lot of the inquiries to customer self-service. Do you believe this?
I don't know. I mean, I think I believe that they did fire 700 full-time agents. That doesn't surprise me. What I think the question is going to be is, what's the customer satisfaction in the long run of this? Because, when call center, when automated call systems first came in, that sort of thing was touted. We were able to reduce our agent load by some percent. But then when you actually start getting real customer service, how customer reactions, they were like, yeah, I hate using the, punch one for whatever. So I think the reality and the perception may be two different things.
Yeah, fair enough. So I will say that this has caused a big stir in contact centers across the country, across the world, because they're big cost centers, and anytime you can remove people, it makes a big difference to them. And so this is the first real example I've seen where someone's actually saying, I just saved 40 million. I know some other examples that people have told me, but like they're publicly claiming this, which I think also has some market optics intent, associated with it. And certainly OpenAI, attaching themselves to OpenAI has some other branding elements, and this is good for OpenAI. But I think this is going to lead to a lot more activity in the contact center space, which has been kind of slowing. There was a lot of interest last year. It's been kind of slowing as people are thinking, how do I absorb this and stuff like that? This is going to put pressure on everybody who runs a contact center, because their CEO is going to be like, Klarna did this. Why can't you? I need that savings by the end of the year. So I think that's what we've gotten ahead of us. Okay, so this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this about every week, usually 11 a.m. Thursday or Friday. If you're out there, just give us a like. If you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, certainly you can make comments and things like that. But please give us a like. We appreciate that. Winners and losers of the week, Alan. I'll start with a loser. I'll do the obvious one. Like, clearly it's Google. I mean, self-inflicted wounds seem to be their core competency these days. What's your loser of the week?
My loser of the week was going to be Sundar specifically. I think this is really more and more highlighting that as a leader, he is not leading Google well. He did make a couple of small saving graces, but I think he's handled the situation poorly. So I think he's the big loser in the whole Google brouhaha.
Yeah, really well said. Who's the winner?
I'm going to narrow this one a little. I'm going to say Google developers. And by that, I mean people who are developing with Google stuff, and developers more broadly, because having more options and being able to find the options that fit in with other tools that we're using is only going to be a win for us. And all of these companies pushing each other to do better and better things is making tools better and better. And I think we're going to be seeing that more and more over the next few months.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think like over the last year, I mean, basically Google's kind of discouraged people from spending too much time with their models, and now they actually have the suite that they know is good. And I think there's no question that these are very good models. Whether they're as good as they purport to be is like a different story. Forget about all this sort of back and forth. I agree with that. And I'll just say, is a closing, my win of the week is going to be with Mistral. I think the idea that they come out with a proprietary model, that means they have a revenue model. They've got distribution through Azure. I think this is a big step up for them, and I would say that they were interesting, but they've fully arrived at this point. And I think the biggest risk right now, the company with the biggest risk, is not Google or OpenAI. It's actually Meta. Because Meta wants people to use its open source models. And I think a lot of the things in those proprietary models are going to make it back into the open source suite from Mistral.
I agree. And, I think if I want to toss in another partial loser here, it's companies like Meta and Amazon, who are still, Amazon is still very much lost in the woods when it comes to AI.
I'll leave it on that. We'll see how this all plays out. Hey, thanks everybody. Give us a like on the way out. This has been the Generative AI News Rundown. That's Elon Firstenberg. I'm Bret Kinsella. Come back next week. Read Synthedia and check out 2 voice devs. We'll put a link in the notes so that people can check out some of the great work that Elon's been doing on his podcast. All right, everyone.
Thanks, Bret.
Bye bye.